The never-ending Afghanistan War is well known, but few people know much about it. The war and conflicts in Afghanistan has been ongoing for over 30 years, causing the country to stay far behind other countries in terms of development. What parties are involved? How did the war start? And what role does the United States play in this conflict? In this video, I will discuss the Afghan War, its history, and the United States' participation. The British and the Soviets were the first to see the country as a potential target. Afghanistan was strategically placed, tying South and Central Asia with the Middle East and giving access to India. The current standoff has its roots back to the 1970s, when the long-established kingdom was deposited. The conflicts in the 70s have great similarities with the ones we see today. The political elite in Kabul, Afghanistan's capital, sought to reform and modernize the country, whereas the majority of Afghans in rural regions were either uninterested or distrustful towards the reforms. This resulted in a very unstable existence and a regime that was marked by coups, corruption, and murder. It all ended when the communists killed the leader of the PDPA, People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, and during this period in 1979, the Soviets deposited their forces to Afghanistan. The time was advantageous for the Soviets, as the country was filled with disagreement and lacked a strict regime with a leader. As a result of the invasion, the Soviets established a communist regime. This was unpopular with the population, and the people rose up in revolt. People in Afghanistan saw the government as a threat to the country's cultural and religious identity. That is why rebel groups began to form in rural regions in order to fight the Soviet occupation. Religious extremists made up the majority of the rebels. The rebels were viewed by the rest of the world as a single-lodged movement known as the Mujahideen. After the Soviet invasion in 1979, the United States sought out to put a halt to communism. Therefore, they took side with the rebels. Along with Saudi Arabia, United States spent tens of billions of dollars in weapons and money for the rebels in the country to succeed. Thus began a long-running war between the communists and the Mujahideen. Within the Mujahideen, a broad fundamentalistic and conservative religious movement known as Hizb-e-Islami developed. This movement was led by Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. The United States and its allies armed the movement in an attempt to defeat the Soviet Union. The war also sparked a rivalry among the Mujahideen. The wars became increasingly bloody, with an estimated 600,000 Afghans killed. In 1989, the Soviet Union withdrew their forces from Afghanistan, leaving behind a country in absolute disarray. The different rebel groups were eventually able to defeat the communists in Kabul, but they never reached an agreement as to how power would be distributed in the future. Instead, the fight carried on. This had now become a civil war, which lasted until the Islamist Taliban took control of the nation in between 1996 to 1997. Almost all corruption and crime were eradicated under the Taliban's reign, and the country was remembered for many years as peaceful and stable. The price for this, however, was a political and cultural dictatorship put together by the fact that women were denied to study or work, theft was punished with amputation, and opponents of the Taliban were persecuted and killed. This regime lasted until October 2001, when the so-called Afghan Northern Alliance regained control of the majority of the country with the help of NATO, the US, and the military. During the Taliban's regime, the terrorist network Al-Qaeda had their headquarters in Afghanistan. It was from this place the terror attacks on the US Embassy in Nairobi in 1998 was organized by the leader of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. Although Al-Qaeda lingered in Afghanistan for a very long time under the protection of the Taliban, the US found it impossible to defeat them. Secret negotiations were initiated about the disclosure of bin Laden, but the two sides were never able to reach an agreement. The US wanted bin Laden brought to justice in the United States, whereas the Taliban would never extend beyond disclosing his whereabouts to another Muslim country. When Al-Qaeda carried out the brutal terror attacks against New York and Washington on 11th September 2001, the United States lost their patience. They wanted bin Laden instantly. The Taliban refused to extradite bin Laden. Therefore, on October 7th, the US started a comprehensive bombing of Taliban's positions. The Taliban's regime was overthrown 2 months later. NATO and the US provided financial and military support, as well as support from several Western countries, to help establish an interim governing council and install Hamid Karzai as president. For the first time in Afghanistan's history, free elections were held in 2004, and Karzai was formally elected as president. Despite the demise of the Taliban's regime, the war was far from over. Today, there is a government and a president who governs Afghanistan. Hamid Karzai was re-elected as president in 2004 following free elections. Many people have expressed concerns about the second elections, which was held in the same way as the first. This is due to allegations that this election was contaminated with fraud and corruption. What are the possible solutions? The war will continue as long as the Taliban tries to reclaim territory lost after their regime fell apart. They attempt to reclaim power by conquering the country and its inhabitants. The United States and other NATO members are present now. Osama bin Laden, the head of Al-Qaeda, was killed by the US military in May 2011. Many believe that they then killed the alibi for the war and that they should have pulled out. They are certain that they must continue to prevent Afghanistan from becoming a terrorist haven. President Biden announced that US troops will be pulling out of Afghanistan by September 11, 2021 and leave Afghanistan by themselves. This indicates that all countries are departing and that the training of Afghans' organs is completed. When this happens, Afghanistan will have to deal with reconstructing themselves. Can they handle it? The Taliban is as powerful as ever, and Afghans on the front lines will now be forced to fight alone. There's still a civil war between the government and the Taliban, regardless of whether the US or any other country blends. Many people believe that countries should leave Afghanistan to manage its own issues within the country. The US and all of the NATO countries engaged are spending a significant amount of money on this. Since 2001, the relationship between the government, the US, and NATO have appeared to be excellent. However, the situation between the West and Afghanistan has escalated a bit lately. This is because the ISAF operations have cost human lives, both foreign and civilian lives. According to the US Defense Department, as of May 2021, 2,312 US troops have been killed and about 20,600 have been wounded in action during the war. Karzai has been more skeptical of the US meddling in Afghanistan, holding them accountable for many of the conflicts. The withdrawal of the forces is called the exit strategy. Several conferences have been conducted to debate how this should be accomplished. They had to accept that Afghanistan would not be able to fend for itself totally when the United States withdrew all help. They can't just leave without further consideration. The amount of contributions and funds that will be given in 2021 has been agreed upon by the member states. There are a few advisors and military support elements that will be left to help, in addition to the cash assistance. Afghanistan remains one of the poorest countries on the planet. The future of Afghanistan is unknown, but the withdrawal is prompted by disagreements over how much peace ISAF has contributed and how much money member states have had to spend on the conflict. Rebel groups and various ethnic groups exist and will always exist in Afghanistan. As a result, tensions will rise among the population, resulting in civil wars. We have come to the conclusion that there is no military solution to the conflict. We will have to wait and see what happens on the 11th of September. For the time being, they should concentrate on reconciliation with the Taliban.